Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for May 22nd, 2020, recorded around 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, taking a look here at the sea surface temperature anomalies, this was updated yesterday on May 21st. You do notice that across the Atlantic main development region, the Atlantic is really starting to warm up and is about a half a degree to a degree Celsius above the long-term average across portions of the main development region. And across the Eastern Pacific and especially the Nino 3.4 regions, that has really taken a toll over the last several weeks as we continue to see a plummeting Nino 3.4 region, which has now temperatures of about minus 1 degree to almost a full 2 degrees Celsius below the long-term average, setting up again what could very likely be some sort of El Nino or La Nina development rather. Some sort of La Nina development to form across the region really within the next couple of months or so. And again, that's going to set up a fairly active Atlantic hurricane season. And it is more and more light is coming into the view picture here that does suggest that this hurricane season will be particularly active. Now, there is still some hindrances, especially with the AMO configuration. We are in sort of a weird AMO pattern between an AMO phase 2, which favors the subtropical regions, and an AMO phase 1, which is the more traditional for the busy hurricane seasons, which favors the Atlantic main development region to warm significantly. We are kind of in a blend of both, and we have seen that in some notable seasons, but also some seasons that were a complete bust. So now, there is likely to be a fairly big amount of activity this year in the Atlantic, and certainly this is helping with not really much going on in the way of an El Nino. Instead, we have a La Nina type environment setting up. Now, keep in mind, the environment always lags about several months behind, but we've really not been seeing as strong of shear across this region really over the past several months because of this waning El Nino and transition into a La Nina. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. If you take a look here at the actual sea surface temperatures, this is coming off of tropicaltidbits.com, updated as of 7 a.m. this morning. You do notice where most of our energy is still in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, but we do notice that the whole Atlantic main development region, for the most part, basically towards the west of about 50 degrees west here, is generally favorable for hurricanes to develop and tropical systems. So the Atlantic main development region as a whole is getting itself established, and west of about 50 degrees west, it is becoming more and more favorable for tropical cyclones to develop. Now, there's still a lot of wind shear across the region, and if we take a look here at the actual wind shear, you do notice there's still about 40 to 50 knots of shear running across the whole entire tropical Atlantic at this point. There is still some drier air. Notice all of these puffy clouds over here. There is still some drier, more stable air across this area, so there's not going to be a lot. You notice the westerly winds are still really cutting across this area and doing quite a number, but that is expected to relax significantly over the next coming months. Again, we typically don't start watching for MDR activity to actually develop really until about late July. So it is going to be now, for the most part, our homegrown type systems across portions of the southwestern Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean for our homegrown development. And then towards the end of July, we start typically watching this area out here in the main development region for our typical hurricanes that come off, or typical tropical waves that come off of the Cabo Verde Islands. We've already had about 2 or 3 tropical waves that have come off, and one actually was ending up here in the Caribbean with some of this convection that got established a couple of days ago, or so. So that's certainly something we've already started to see our tropical waves come off, and that is going to be something that we're really going to keep in mind and continue to watch here really over the next several months. Now, if you take a look, this is also from tropicaltidbits.com. This is taking a look at the Nino 3.4 region, which is basically, once again, is basically this area out and through here of the Eastern Pacific. That area has been in a fairly decent decline rapidly over the last several weeks, really from about mid-April, early to mid-April, all the way in through now late May. We've seen that plummet, and the general trend again is to head towards a more cool neutral to La Nina type environment to set up across the region, and that is going to significantly enhance the potential for the Atlantic main development region and really across the whole entire Atlantic to be just more favorable overall. In the Nino 4 region, which has also been affected by this easterly wind burst that has occurred that's really cooled off the 3.4 region, has also trended in a general downward slope really over the last several months. Generally, today's value is about positive 1.83. But again, the Nino 4 regions don't really play a significant role in the actual El Nino. It's really the El Nino 3.4 region, but it is just something interesting to note that we've really seen, since about March, we've seen that downward trend continue across in the Nino 4 regions, which is these regions right over there. Now, taking a look here, this is the 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. This is coming off of one of the predictions here, and this is the GFS forecast model. And as you go down here, you go down in time, and we're typically really looking about right across here. This is the Nino 3.4 region, right roughly in through there. You do notice this slew of easterly winds, which are these bluer and purple anomalies, and the red are these westerly winds. You do notice that we did have a fairly strong westerly wind burst in the Western Pacific that was coupled with some of the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation passing through. We did see quite a bit of an westerly wind burst across that region, but we have continued to see a general easterly wind continue and thrive in the Nino 3.4 regions, which once again have really cooled off this area and have significantly hindered the development for any El Nino. Again, there isn't going to be an El Nino this year at all. There will be no El Nino, and as you can see, even with time, we're still expecting through about the end of May for some easterly winds to continue. That should continue to allow this area to cool down and really not be of any significance in terms of hindrance of the tropical Atlantic this year. And if we take a look here, this is just another way of looking at these sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific. You notice this is now going down with depth here, and this is the anomalies. Again, we're typically looking right in through about this area for the Nino 3.4 regions, and you notice that a lot of this cooler ocean anomaly temperatures, that's cooler water down at depth, is now kind of coming up to the surface and is surfacing because of an upwelling easterly wind. Easterly wind causes upwelling, and that's going to continue to upwell a lot of this cooler water that's sitting at depth right now, about 100 meters to about 150 meters below the surface. That's going to continue to allow the easterly winds to allow this to surface, rise up to the surface, and continue to cool off, not only at the surface but also at depth, which again is going to be fairly significant in terms of boosting the Atlantic hurricane season this year. There's not going to be an El Nino. There's not going to be that hindrance for this year. So we are likely heading towards a La Nina type environment by the end of this year, if not beforehand. Now, taking a look here at the upper ocean heat content, this was updated today. This is taking a look at the depth of the warmest water, really taking a look at these higher numbers out through here. The higher you get up in the scale towards the greens and the yellows, you're getting more depth of the warmer water, and the blues, generally you're getting less of the warmer water at depth. Again, we've started to see the depth continue to increase across portions of southwestern Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. This is the intertropical convergence zone down here, and again, that's not really favoring really MDR right now, but again, generally right about west of about 50 degrees west here, we're continuing to see this area of favorable upper ocean heat content to just enough to support tropical systems, especially near the Lesser Antilles and through the Caribbean. There's always enough upper ocean heat content. Again, this is going to matter when we actually get tropical systems to go into this environment. And again, this upper ocean heat content right now that's still down here in the intertropical convergence zone, that's going to gradually lift north with time. Again, we are only in May. This is late May. We typically do not see these upper ocean heat content numbers really favor about east of 50 degrees really until you get to August, September. So that's when it's generally at its peak. Now, that's not to say there's no upper ocean heat content out here. There is some, but not a whole lot. But really west of about 50 degrees west, you're really starting to pick up these numbers. And again, that's very, very significant because those are the areas that have land. Those are the areas that people live in. Again, if we don't get these tropical waves that develop out here in the main development region, they typically favor a more due west movement, and then they develop somewhere in here. And again, it's not really the storms that develop out here in the main development region so much as it's really the storms that develop about west of about 50 degrees west is where typically our land masses are. So that's kind of one of the most important things, that just because there really isn't a lot of upper ocean heat content in the main development region currently, and doesn't mean that there will be, but B, most importantly, if these tropical waves don't get established out here in the main development region, they get established further west and typically where land masses lived. If you look at Hurricane Maria back in 2017, that really got going here in the Lesser Antilles and that affected Puerto Rico, that really did a number, and that was from a tropical wave that didn't develop out in the main development region, but did develop closer to the Lesser Antilles. And that's one of the main things that you have to keep in mind, is that just because systems don't form in the main development region, that doesn't mean that they can't form once they're in a more favorable environment, and we've seen that time and time and time again. Always remember, Hurricane Katrina did not come from the main development region. Katrina actually formed in the Bahamas and southwestern Atlantic off of the Florida coast, and then traveled through portions of South Florida in through the Gulf of Mexico, where it became a Category 5. So again, it's very important to understand that not everything has to originate from the main development region. A lot of our greatest concerns actually come from what's called quote-unquote homegrown development that occurs in and close to land areas in the southwestern Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico, and generally basically towards the west of about 50 degrees west. So everywhere to the west of about 50 degrees west, it's really important that you guys understand that just because things don't develop out here doesn't mean that tropical waves aren't going to roll off and develop somewhere else. So it's very important to understand that. And again, for you folks who did not see the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season outlook from the National Hurricane Center and NOAA yesterday, they came up with a 60% chance of above normal season, with only about a 10% chance of below normal, and 30% chance of near normal, with 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. And they did note that this could be on the upper end. These numbers could actually fall on the upper end of the distribution into what they're actually forecasting. So it is very important to understand this is just a prediction, but it does serve as a basis and a reminder to generally focus right now to get your hurricane preparedness kits ready. Again, hurricane season is 10 days away as of today, 9 days away as of tomorrow. We are heading into the single digits in terms of how long and how many days it is till the start of hurricane season tomorrow. 9 days as of tomorrow. So again, very important that you do understand. And speaking of hurricane season and tropical systems homegrown development, we are looking at some potential at what could be something forming either on the eastern Pacific side or the Atlantic and Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico side here towards the later of the month and in through beginning of June. We are expecting what's called a Central American gyre to possibly develop across portions of the Eastern Pacific and really Central America and the Southwestern Atlantic. And this could set up a very favorable pattern for either the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic to kick off Tropical Cyclone Genesis. And that has been forecasted now by most of the computer guidance models. They have started to trend upwards in terms of something trying to develop either in the Southwestern Atlantic or the Eastern Pacific towards either the latter part of the month or towards the beginning of next month and the beginning of hurricane season. That something could be lurking out there. Again, nothing as of right now. Officially, the National Hurricane Center hasn't said anything, but we have tremendous model support of what's called a Central American gyre, which is basically turning in the winds and lowering pressures across this region. And that could set up a very favorable pattern for tropical cyclones to develop either in the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic. Again, right now, climatology does favor the Eastern Pacific, but you can never discredit the Gulf of Mexico and Southwestern Atlantic and the Caribbean at the beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season. And this is from Ben Knoll. This is the European model and UK Met precipitation anomaly blend. And we're taking a look. The greens are the higher precip anomalies, more precip, and the browns here are less precip and less convection. Again, this is from August through October of 2020. You do notice that the main development region lights up like a board across here with a fairly substantial dry subtropical environment that would favor these longer track systems to develop. Again, this is all just something that right now, this is in the computer guidance data that does suggest a fairly active hurricane season. So for you folks in the Lesser Antilles, across the United States, through Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Bahamas, again, it never hurts to start paying attention now, knowing what you're going to do in the event of a hurricane, having your preparedness kits ready, because it's coming. And hurricane season is 9 days away as of tomorrow. So we are already watching. We've already had Tropical Storm Arthur, and we're getting ready to head into a more favorable pattern as we head in through the latter part of May here, the last couple of days of May, and through the beginning of June. We are going to set up for a very favorable pattern for something to try to develop either in the Atlantic side or the Eastern Pacific. So it is very important to understand that these have implications, and you can also start preparing now, and it's going to make a very big difference when it comes time for something to actually come your way. Now, taking a look here at the 850 millibar vorticity, this is the spin in the atmosphere about 5,000 feet off the ground. The higher you go up in this scale and the higher contours you get towards the reds and whites, the higher vorticity you're getting. And you're not really getting anything right now. This is the leftover vorticity of Tropical Storm Arthur, which is out here again. Not really showing any development here over the next 5 days from this stretched out area from the Azores all the way down through portions of the mid-Atlantic states. There is something over here in the Eastern Pacific that models are trying to latch onto, and yeah, we do have a little bit of area of concentrated spin in the atmosphere, but again, currently the models are not really suggesting that it's quite that favorable time yet, but this is going to be something that we're watching. This whole bundle of energy is expected to really come together over the next several days and weeks across portions of the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific, so that is going to be something we're going to continue to monitor. Again, the wind shear right now, though, is just too strong really across this whole entire region, so not really watching for anything in the Atlantic yet, but it could become a little bit more favorable towards the end of the month as we head in through June. And if we take a look here, this is the GFS forecast model. This is coming off of TropicalTidbits.com, the 12Z model. You do notice that this is the remnants of Tropical Storm Arthur over here, and there is also some vorticity out here in the Gulf of Mexico. Not really anything interesting, though, as of right now. As we head out through the next 180 hours, again, the GFS and the European is the only reason why we're showing beyond 120 hours, but both the GFS and the European model try to develop something out here in the southwestern Atlantic just towards the south of Bermuda, and also something out here in the Eastern Pacific, which once again, we do have an area of vorticity out there. So the models might be latching on to two areas of development, either in the southwestern Atlantic or the Eastern Pacific. One of these areas is trying to develop, and again, if we just head out there through the end of the forecast period, through about May 30th, again, some sort of subtropical-ish system potentially there with the Central American gyre that's setting up across portions of the Eastern Pacific and Atlantic. And if we take a look here at the European model, this is the 12Z European model, we do notice that this is our stretched out area of vorticity from Arthur and an old frontal boundary. There is something that tries to get itself established here, but not really paying attention to that. And again, here's our area of vorticity and spin across the Eastern Pacific, and again, that tries to get it more so established. If we head out just through about the next 192 through about the end of May, again, even the European is starting to develop something in the southwestern Atlantic, so it is going to be something we're going to keep in mind here. Again, this is our Central American gyre that's now setting up across this region, so most of the models are indicating that something is going to likely try to develop over the next several weeks or so, but again, where and exactly when is going to be the major keys across the region. Taking a real quick look at Florida weather, again, not really much going on right now. We do have a sea breeze that's getting ready to pass through portions of Orlando. There was actually some big severe weather down yesterday south of Lake Okeechobee, and some big heavy rainfall across this area yesterday. Again, we're looking for much of the same today with some potential sea breeze boundary collisions over Lake and probably Orange County, so that's going to be something to pay attention to. But again, For the most part, the Atlantic Basin as a whole is getting ready for a tropical cyclone, or is getting ready to head into the hurricane season. And favorability is going to start opening the window for the potential of development here within the next coming weeks or so, either in the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic, so that's going to be something to kind of keep in mind. We will be back here with another video update probably on Sunday, so keep tuned for that. Hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and have a great night, and I will see you back here likely on Sunday.